All right, so the last couple of videos here are going to look at further into these ideas that population ecologists ask themselves, um, starting with the pattern of reproduction. So, what is the pattern reproduction? What does that mean? So we look at a species' reproductive strategies and the effect on its growth potential. Some examples that you could consider would be lifespan. So, how long does an animal live? Maturity age. How long does it take for that animal to get to a point of higher maturity? How many offspring does each animal have? Things like that. A really simple example that you can consider would be to compare humans versus dogs. Humans, we generally only give birth to one offspring per thing, right? And we can't give birth to offspring until we've reached a certain maturity age, until girls have gone through puberty and boys too, so until pubescent happens. Excuse me. And this can only occur every 16 to 18 months, right? Maybe you're someone who has, what do they call it, like Irish siblings or Irish twins, whatever, where you're really, really close together, but you can't, a woman cannot just like pop out one baby and then 2 months later get pregnant again. It takes time to kind of heal things up. And we also live a very long time as humans, right? Or I think the average lifespan is about 75 years or so. So we live a very, very long time. Whereas dogs, they give birth to very, very large litters, much larger than humans, right? They can give birth anywhere from 1 to 8, 9, 10 puppies, depending on the dog, depending on, all these different other circumstances. And they can also give birth quite often. The gals go into heat, several times a year. But dogs can only live anywhere from 10 to 15 years, right? So we have these variations in our reproductive strategies between those two different species. And this is all biologically driven, right? It's not like we choose this life of our reproductive strategies, right? Biology has selected each of these species to be the way that we are for whatever biological reason biology decided. This next idea here is looking at how we like separate these different types of species here, right? So on the left-hand side, this is the infographic 7 from your book. So this is looking at our selected species where they have a very short life. They grow rapidly as an individual, and they mature very early. And they can have many small offspring, and that many can be anywhere from tens to hundreds to thousands of offspring. Think of like how many eggs that fish can lay. If you're like, I didn't even know fish can lay a whole lot of eggs. Well, if you've ever had tobiko at sushi or roe, which are fish eggs, that's a whole lot of eggs. That's from one animal, so it's pretty wild, right? In our selected species, they have little prenatal care. They kind of just give birth and say go, bye-bye, right? Think like sea turtles. They lay their eggs and then they leave their babies to hope that they live a long life. But they also give birth to a lot because they know that probably a lot of them are going to die, right? That's just kind of the thing that happens. They are also tend to be adapted to a very unstable environment. And that's one of the reasons biologically why they have these characteristics, because of this unstable environment. They are generally often also considered prey. They're not quite often predators, but they are kind of perhaps lower on the food chain or food web, kind of however you want to describe that. So they get eaten more often than they eat. Then they also use many habitats and resources. So some examples of some R selected species in this infographic include dandelions, like all those seeds. Those are all different little reproductive babies of a dandelion. I know it's kind of weird to think of plants as babies, but hey, here we are. Or things like spotted knapweed, or little nuggets like deer mice, right? Like we don't have very few deer mice that are like hunting elk, right? So deer mice are the ones that get hunted. Then on the other side of the spectrum, we have K-selected species. And pretty much all the characteristics here are almost stark opposites of our selected species. So they live a longer life. They have a slower growth of an individual. They have a later maturity. And they have much fewer offspring, right? So instead of tens to hundreds of thousands, they maybe only have like 2, 3, 4, or, you know, maybe still a bit few in the tens, but it will still take a long time, right? Like whales, they can give birth to, maybe I think, it depends on the whale, but I may be speaking incorrectly here, but I think like one humpback whale can give birth to maybe like 10 humpback babies over her lifetime. But she still stays with her calf for at least 2 years before it matures away. Again, going back to that idea of high prenatal care. Even with humans, right? We don't consider humans adults until we're 18, but you still give a small child a lot of care until they're what, like 5, 6, 7, 10, 12 years old. If you're a helicopter parent, until they're 30 years old. I'm just kidding. But you give them a lot of care. And we tend to be adapted more to a stable environment as opposed to an unstable environment. We tend to be the predators, or K-selected species tend to be the predators. I'm kind of grouping humans into this more K-selected species, if you couldn't tell. But then we also need specific habitat and resources. So instead of using, we need that kind of thing. I do also want to mention lastly here that not all species fit rather nicely in either group. Some actually have characteristics of both factors here. So notice that it's a spectrum, right? So it's not, you can be on one side, you can be on the other, but it's also a bit of a spectrum here as well. And it could also consider different spans of your life or different times of your life. So that is the last question that population ecologists asked, not the fully last one, but one that we're going to consider here in this class. Do be sure to revisit that first slide and kind of consider those last 2 or 3 questions that we didn't get to here, and maybe consider how they could be applied to ecology just in general, or perhaps just to humanity. Thank you so much for watching.